If I may have your attention, please. At this time, we're going to begin the funeral services here today for Mr. Robert Loren Wolfberg. As we begin the service, I would ask if any of you might have a cell phone or any other noise-making device, please turn them off at this time. Officiating the service here today is Rabbi Bina Wing from Temple Bethel in Rockford, and the rabbi will begin the service assisting the family in the ancient tradition of Kriya. If I could ask the family members wearing ribbons to please stand together at this time.
Hello, friends. We gather together to remember Robert, Bob, and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to his family. Mourning can be a time filled with many emotions and memories. And so we begin our service with the recitation of psalms and prayers. In that way, we link his life with the millennia-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God, of which he was a part. From Psalm 90. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return us to dust. You decree, return, you mortals. For in your sight 1,000 years are as yesterday when it has passed, or as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself at daybreak. It flourishes anew. At dusk, it withers and dries up. The span of our life is 80 years and 10, or given strength 80 years, or 85 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Teach us, therefore, to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God, show mercy to your servants, satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. From Psalm 121. Esa enai el harim me'ain yavo ezri. Esa enai el harim me'ain yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian. Adonai is your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your life. Adonai will guard your going and coming, now and forever. Adonai mi yagur b'ohalecha mi yishkon b'har kodshecha holech tamid ufoel tzedek udover emet bilvavo. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. Of all the Psalms that are in existence, there's probably none that is more meaningful and known to more people than Psalm 23, which I invite you to read or to recite along with me. Is it? I don't know if it's in here. Oh, it is. So we'll read this version, and I invite you to join along together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, sometimes known as Ecclesiastes, wrote a well-known passage which is appropriate for someone who has lived such a long life, like Bob, such a full life, and includes so many things that he may have experienced. There is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for destroying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time to refrain from embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. In another place, Kohelet wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their task, never cherish their loved ones enough before they are called home. How they yearned for yet another respite from the final summons, and how we yearned to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this moment. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing." We'll now have a few words of remembrance from Bob's family, beginning with Jill sharing her mom's thoughts.
Hi, thank you all for being here. Mom asked me to read this for her because she was pretty sure she wouldn't be able to get through it without falling apart. So this is from Bob's wife, Judy Wolfberg. Louder. Oh, louder? Okay. Is that better? Okay. I first met Bob in 1978 when I started working for Pazload. He was a mechanical engineer and I worked in the marketing department. He wore a pocket protector and clip-on ties. At the time, we were both married to other people. My first impression was that this Wolfberg guy was a nerd and never gave him a second thought. That was my opinion at the time. It was only years later that Bob and I carpooled when the company moved from Skokie to Lincolnshire. We were told by Bob's former girlfriend to drive together to work. When we drove together, I started to see Bob on a new level. He was smart and kind, which definitely appealed to me. On the way to work, me, started to question why certain phrases were the way they were. For example, do you swill gin and guzzle beer, or do you guzzle gin and swill beer? Why are the dark clouds always called ominous? I still don't know. Time has a way of changing one's perception and understanding of previous beliefs. I began to see Bob differently. We both divorced from our previous spouses. When we were both single again, we began our love affair. The first kiss was like fireworks going off in my head. Wow! I felt tingles when we held hands. In 1987, we started living together. I wasn't too sure that this arrangement would work out, but I decided to try it. We were married 4 years later at Fiddlesticks our local watering hole, as he called it. I don't remember all that the rabbi said, except when he omitted, "Till death do you part." So I guess we are now joined together forever. How lucky can one get? Our married life was wonderful. We were fortunate enough to travel to many places, but his place of love was in Mazatlan, Mexico. We spent 22 years wintering there. This was Bob's paradise. I liked the home away from home, but Bob loved it there. Up until this year, he played golf 3 times a week while I taught English to the locals and then to the hospice nursing staff. All the while I was volunteering, Bob patiently sat in the car waiting for me. That was Bob. When the pandemic hit, I quit teaching after 6 years. I was sad, but Bob was happy to be relieved of his chauffeur duties. In all our years together, we never had an argument. Before our discussions escalated into an argument, he would say, "I don't want to talk about it." That, too, was Bob. He saved me in many ways. He built up my self-esteem, and when something I did amused him, he would tell me I was adorable. Without a doubt, my shining knight wore golf shirts, cargo shorts, and T-shirts with funny sayings such as, "We'll work for wine," or "Save water, drink beer." Obviously, he never made it to GQ. He rarely spent money on himself, but when he did, he bought his clothes at Goodwill or the flea market in Mazatlan. Yet, he would spend thousands of dollars for cruises and airfares for us. Nevertheless, he was frugal about himself, an amazing habit I never quite understood. But that was Bob. He never commented on any new things that I bought or wore. I learned that was just Bob's way. It was my understanding that he approved of everything because he was never critical of my purchases. When I was overweight, he said there was just more of me to love. When I lost weight, he called me a spinner. He adored me and his children and grandchildren. He loved his Corvette, his golf, and the friendships he made along the way. He was an unassuming, generous guy who never complained. He taught me that other people's problems belong to them and not to us. His most often used phrase was, "Not my problem, not my business." A lesson for an ulcer-free existence, except for when it came to his family. But that was Bob. I will miss him more than words can say. He truly was my soulmate, my best friend, and my beloved. He was perfect for me and I for him, even though he watched Fox News. He gave his family the love he had for them and me. He may not have shown it, but he felt it. He was an ordinary guy, but an extraordinary husband, and that, indeed, was Bob.
Such beautiful words. Thank you. We'll now hear from Bob's oldest son, Larry.
Hello. As I was beginning to think about what to say today, I took a look back on what I wrote to say at my mom's services 20 years ago. I was surprised to see that what I said was mostly about me, and at that time, I realized I should focus now about speaking about Dad. After giving it some thought, I realized, well, why shouldn't I talk about me? I am who I am because of him. I am both literally and figuratively a reflection of my father. First, the most notable reflection is obviously our appearance. I am my father's son. When I share photos of my dad with friends, they all say, "Is that you?" And as I stand here now, I'm sure most of you can definitely see the resemblance. One of the strongest attributes that I have been blessed with from my dad is a sense of innovation and creativity. We both enjoyed and made a living by designing. His creations were more on the technical side as an engineer with his name on 5 patents for being on the design team that created air power, nailers, and staple guns used in manufacturing and housing. Other attributes that I've absorbed from my dad are efficiency, problem solving, as well as critical thinking. Although I can't really give you an example of these, I just wanted y'all to know this. Now on to what we call the Wolfberg traits. As those closest to us can attest to, the number one trait would be grumpiness. This trait is like most of the Wolfberg traits, can at least be traced back to my dad's dad, Ted, and possibly even further back to dad's grandfather, etc. It's not a trait I'm particularly proud to own, but I have it nonetheless. Additional Wolfberg traits include eating on schedule and getting to bed early. Again, those closest to us can tell you you can't break the schedule or bear the wrath of the number one trait, grumpiness. The last Wolfberg trait that I can think of right now is a sense of exploration. Traveling and learning more about our world was important to my dad. I can remember taking generational trips from an early age that continued annually throughout most of his life. Moving on to more Wolfberg traits that I have not been touched with, but Dad shared with his father, Ted. Golf. This, I believe, was one thing that they had most in common. They played it together, they watched it together. Me, I never got it. Clothes, which you've heard of already from Jill. Neither Dad or Ted wore clothes horses. I felt like Ted only owned 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts, and a coat. Dad also was limited in his wardrobe, shorts and a polo. I guess Dad was truly a beach bum at heart. Dad had one attribute that was unique to him that none of us shared. This was his sense of extreme adventure. Dad was definitely a thrill seeker. I can never remember a time that Dad was not a motorhead. He loved his cars, and he loved to get on the track and race them. His most famous car was the Gray Ghost, a vehicle he Frankensteined together and was consistently tinkering with to improve his speed on the track. His passion extended to our summer vacations when we would travel to Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin for the Can-Am races at Road America. Another thrill that Dad seeked was hang gliding. I don't know any other kid in my school, and most likely even in Skokie, that had a dad that built his own hang glider. He would take me and my friends to the Michigan dunes on Saturdays to watch him do test flights. This definitely increased my coolness factor with my friends. Another factor that raised my coolness as a teen was that Dad had a motorcycle, an orange Honda 350. Robin can clearly remember riding on the back wearing a sparkly red helmet, which in fact we recently discovered both the red sparkly helmets in Dad's garage. I remember one summer, after I turned 16, Dad got me a job in Elk Grove Village as a machine press operator. No idea how he swung that one. I didn't have a car, so he let me take the Honda. I loved it. I'm sure Dad has his reservations about it, but it was really just a straight shot down Oakton with a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. I'm sure I went over that. The last thing I can think of that was unique to Dad was his nickname. Of course, all the Wolfberg men, including myself, have at one time or another been called Wolfie. I always thought how endearing it was for Sophie, my grandmother, to call my grandfather Ted Wolfie. But it was Sophie that gave Dad his nickname. The story goes that when Dad was a toddler, he recited the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill to Sophie. He couldn't remember the line, fetch a pail of water, and would always say, fetch a petch. This made Sophie laugh so hard that she decided to call him Fetch. I remember every Sunday when we would visit Ted and Sophie, with her waiting at the top of the stairs and hollering fetch as soon as she would see him at the bottom of the stairs. I guess looking back at what I've written, it is primarily about Dad with a sprinkling of myself. But I wanted to close with a letter that Dad wrote me a few years ago. I had a milestone birthday, and my amazing husband Paul compiled a beautiful book of pictures and letters from families and friends. The letter and picture Paul put in the book first was from my dad. Here's the picture. It should pop up in a second. But as the picture comes up, I'll read to you his letter. To my son, on March 13th, 1963, an event occurred that changed my world forever. On the morning that day, Mom's water broke and away we went. Driving across town in the middle of rush hour to reach Mount Sinai, I thought to reach Mount Sinai was a heart-stopping event, but I knew that I would get to the hospital before you did. Even though I had 9 months to prepare for your birth, I was quite the nervous father-to-be. At the hospital waiting room, I sat alone looking at the walls painted sickly color of green. I was nervous enough, but the awful color did not have a calming effect on me. Having read the Chicago Tribune from cover to cover at least 4 times, it became my own company for all those hours waiting news from anyone from the maternity department. Finally, the doctor came to the waiting room and announced that Lawrence Allen Wolfberg arrived safe and sound. My beautiful son was 7 pounds 11 ounces and measured 21 inches long. Today, my baby boy turned 60 years old. It's so incredible to believe that all the years between them and now have taken place in a memory in just a blink of the eye. I may be repeating something that I've said before, but it's worth repeating again. I love you, Larry, not for who you are, but for the man who you become. Happy birthday to my son. Happy birthday to the son who made me a father. Love, Dad. In the final days of Dad's life, I was able to be with him. I sat on his bed and held his hand, noticing how similar they looked to mine as we sat there in silence. When I revisited this picture, it dawned on me how similar the beginning of my relationship ended in a similar way, both of us holding on to each other. But in the beginning, he was holding me. In the end, I was holding him.
Thank you so much. Now we'll hear some words from Jill.
What can I tell you about my stepdad, Bob Wolfberg? I'll tell you some of my memories. Later, my mom will probably correct my facts, but these are my memories. Mom and Bob started dating while I was in college. After a while, they moved in together. When I came home from school, Bob welcomed me into their new home, a 3-bedroom townhouse all the way out in Kishinev, Buffalo Grove. Robin was living there too, so it was quite a house full. And the first time I went there to live, it was around Hanukkah. And before I came home, Bob wanted to know how I would feel if he walked around the house in his underwear. I said, I don't think I would be comfortable, but I knew that that was the first gift I would ever get him, was a bathrobe. I liked Bob right away. He was a volleyball after work, pizza and beer kind of guy. He especially enjoyed Guinness Stout. His favorite hangout was Fiddlesticks, which you've heard about, a restaurant with a bar and a dance floor near their work. He was a little nerdy, as my mom mentioned, but he was very nice and very sweet, a man of few words, and best of all, he made my mom happy. Another thing about Bob, he liked sports cards, which I thought was pretty cool. I remember he had a cute little Austin Healey when I first moved in, and a motorcycle that I don't remember ever working. Eventually, they were replaced by his blue Corvette as his fun car. After he got rid of his old Calais pace car, his next everyday car was a red Firebird Trans Am that we still have. Being an engineer, he figured out how to fit their 3 cars into their 2-car garage. That was the ritual before they left for the winter. They had a lot of rituals together, Mom and Bob. As they got older, dinner was always at 6 o'clock in Buffalo Grove and in Mazatlan, and wherever else I got to go with them when they traveled. Siestas were from 1 to 3, so we had to remember not to call during nap time. Bob is a light sleeper. After dinner was usually PBS or a home fixer-upper show. Bob enjoyed British shows more than regular network TV. He'd watched many different mysteries or history shows. He also loved watching golf and doing crossword puzzles. Going shopping with the two of them was always interesting. Bob would eventually get bored with what Mom and I were doing, and he would wander away. To find each other, they would call to each other, Ethel, Morris, where are you? Most of the time, we'd find Bob on a bench just on the other side of the checkout area. They were always so cute together. Anybody could see how much they adored each other. Zadie was a wonderful grandfather to my children. When they were both born, he and Mom stayed with us for a few days to help out and make sure everyone was okay. He played with them at home and taught them how to play in the ocean in Mexico. When there was something my kids and I didn't know or couldn't figure it out, we'd remember the question so we could play a little game we like to play called Stump Zadie. Most of the time, he really would know the answer. He was a really smart guy. Although he wasn't a practicing Jew, he enjoyed speaking Yiddish. I learned that the answer to sei gesund is be gesund. He especially liked saying that in Mexico, knowing full well that the other person would have no idea what he was saying. I learned Bashert was meant to be, and I learned that when you're frustrated, you say fucking shit, but then you get over it really quickly. Bob was a trooper through most things, even his illness. He took chemo like a champ and wouldn't let it stand in the way of him and his favorite place to be, Mazatlan. Even as his illness progressed, his easygoing nature endured. He always said please and thank you when we do something for him, like find the hat he liked to wear for naps. He would pull it over his eyes to block out the light, or put on golf on TV for him. He would call us from the other room, yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo, when he needed something. Yoo-hoo. It was so darn cute. We were lucky to have Bob in our lives. We were lucky he made Mom so happy. I like to imagine that he's with their dog Rosie in heaven, impatiently waiting for us all to join him. May his memory be for a blessing.
Thank you all so much for those beautiful words. I had a chance to talk with Jill the other day, and of course, Bob's beloved. And I heard a lot of what you heard as well. But there were just a couple of things that really stood out to me that I just wanted to sort of say again, because I thought that they were very special. Just that their attachment to the local place Fiddlesticks, even that they got married there and then continued to go there, and just their extensive travel. One quick word about their dog. So I heard a quick story about how that when you wanted to get the dog, how he was very sure that he made it clear to say, this is your dog, your dog. You're going to take care of the dog, your dog. And then she I don't know whether she came home once or she couldn't find the dog, and it was like sitting on his lap on his chair, and this began a long love connection with the dog as well. And I also just want to note that he was very unassuming, but that as I think Larry, I think you mentioned it, he had 5 patents. Which is a remarkable achievement, but that it was something that he never talked about, that he never bragged about, and just also how supportive he was, and how. So what you heard was how he would say, "You're so adorable." But what I heard in the conversation that we had was that he would say that when she did something that she thought was like a mistake or something that made her feel sort of self-conscious, that he would say, "Oh, you're so adorable," as if to sort of wipe any bad feelings that she might have away, and told her how often, "I'm so glad we're married." And I can imagine that a number of people here who may or may not be married might appreciate hearing something like that on a regular basis, just to hear, I'm so glad we're married. Sometimes I think we forget to say just such a simple thing and how meaningful that was. And I think probably my favorite thing that they told me was how he tucked her in every night and how loving that was. The other thing that they asked me, I think I'll move this down a little bit. The other thing that they asked me when we had our conversation was it okay to have humor at the funeral? And I said, absolutely. That's sometimes some of the most meaningful moments. And honesty. So I in case you were worried, I appreciated your off-color language. And I have to say that, I agree that, sometimes you just got to say those words. My mother talked about how she came to appreciate the value of swearing in her old age. But in addition to that, they said that he had a favorite poem, and was it okay to share that? And my understanding is that it's actually pages and pages long. So fortunately, for our sake, I'm just going to share with you the first paragraph of it. The Shooting of Dan McGrew by Robert Service. A bunch of the boys were whooping it up in the Malamute Saloon. The kid that handles the music box was hitting a jagtime tune. Back of the bar, in a solo game, sat dangerous Dan McGrew, and watching his luck was his light-o'-love, the lady that's known as Lou. One of the other quick things that I'll share was that when I was looking at the online obituary for Bob, sometimes people don't take the time to comment, even though it says, please, offer your comments. And I took a moment and read through just many, many comments that people shared about what a remarkable person Bob was. And there were a lot of comments about Mazatlan, who must be from your Mazatlan community. And just so much love that just sort of emphasized what a special person he was. So I'm just going to share the beginning of the obituary, just so that everybody knows who were the people that were closest, and maybe not everybody knew who was who. So his full name was Robert Loren Wolfberg, beloved husband of Judith, loving father of Lawrence, Larry, and Paul Bowman, Robin and Kevin Hoppenrath, and stepfather of Jill Schachter and Benjamin and Kara Schachter, adoring Zadie of Alexander Hoppenrath, Rachel Kammerer, Peyton Kammerer, and step Zadie of Kaylin Reagan and Julia Reagan, and dear brother of Adele, Nikki Hall, and the late George Hall. And now we're going to take just a moment for us to offer our individual prayers and thoughts about Bob, our private moments. And if you're here in support of the family, not necessarily because you knew Bob, you may take this moment of silence to direct your prayers of comfort to those who are in mourning. So we take just a moment of silent prayer. Mourning is the price we pay for having the courage to love others. Even in grief, we know that the wonder of human life is too complex and too magnificent to be memorialized in endless pain. The gifts of spirit that Bob gave his loved ones cannot be measured or weighed, nor can they be lost or even tarnished by time. Even in our darkest hours, we will know that some of his light and warmth will always be with us, bringing comfort and courage, and in the fullness of time, healing and peace. I share with you now a beloved poem of our tradition that speaks of the journey of life. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but having made the journey stage by stage a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. We continue now with one of our memorial prayers that we recite, known as El Malay Rachamim. And the English is in here, and we'll read the English after I share the Hebrew. And I invite you to please rise. El Malay Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamse Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, Im Kadoshim Utahorim Kizohar HaRakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Reuven Ben Yitzchak HaKohen, Shehalach La'olamo. Ba'al HaRachamim Yasdirehu Beseter Kenafav La'olamim, Vitzor Bitzor HaChaim Et Nishmato. Adonai hunach alato ve'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Robert Loren Wolfberg, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be God's possession, and may his repose be peace. Amen. You may be seated. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember Bob. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the sun, we will remember Zadie. In the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember Fetch. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember Roberto. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too will live, for he is now a part of us as we remember Bob Wolfberg. Early or late, all must answer the summons to return to the source of being. For we lose our hold on life when our time has come, as the leaf falls from the bough when its day is done. The deeds of the righteous enrich us all, as the fallen leaf enriches the soil beneath. The dust returns to the earth. The spirit lives on with God. Like the stars by day, our beloved dead are not seen by mortal eyes, yet they shine on forever. Theirs is eternal peace. Let us be thankful for the companionship that continues in a love stronger than death. Sanctifying the name of God, we honor the memory of Bob. It is said that angels brought the mourner's Kaddish prayer down from heaven. And truly, if there's any bond strong enough to link heaven to earth, it is this prayer. It keeps the living together and forms a bridge to the loved ones who have died. One might say that the Kaddish is the guardian of the people by whom alone it is uttered. The Kaddish prayer contains no reference to death. Rather, it affirms God's glory and omnipotence. The Kaddish is a declaration of faith, exalting God's name. It speaks of life and hope and peace at a time when we might be tempted to despair in our grief. Therefore, the Kaddish possesses a wonderful and sanctifying power. And we turn now to the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which you can find on the back of your program. And I invite you to please rise. And we read together, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayachon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mivarach la'alam ulamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata. Tush bechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved among us. And let us together say, Amen. You may be seated. O God, you who heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds, grant comfort and consolation to these mourners as they face their grief. Fill their lives with the acts of loving kindness and truth, which serve as the genuine memorial to our loved one. The deep bond of love will remain unbroken. And let us say, Amen.
This concludes the service here in our chapel. I want to thank you all for attending today, and we also want to thank those that are watching the service online. The interment will be private. I do want to let everyone here know, and those that are online know, that the family will begin receiving calls of condolence and sitting Shiva immediately following this memorial service at the Continental Restaurant, 788 South Buffalo Grove Road, here in Buffalo Grove. It's in the mall right at Buffalo Grove and Dundee Road on the right-hand side. Also, I'd like you to please take note, those present and those online, this information's on the website that you are on. The family has asked that memorial contributions in Mr. Wolfberg's name be made to the American Cancer Society. That information's on the funeral service folder. At this time, I would ask everyone to please rise as the family and Rabbi are escorted from the chapel. Thank you. Folks, when you go to your cars, I'm sure the family will be heading to their gathering.